as someone who's had to navigate the complexities of identity, cultural expectations, and systemic oppression in this country, racism, anti-Black racism. Mindfulness has had a profound impact on my knowledge around justice, equity, and especially personal authenticity.
Part of the social and racial justice work is getting to know ourselves. So it's not just about, oh, I have to just understand these other people out there. It's how am I inside so I can relate to others?
I found mindfulness to be that sanctuary, a place where I can learn to be my authentic self and to help others do the same. As I delve deeper, practicing mindfulness and self-compassion, I began to notice a shift. I was no longer reacting from a place of stress or cultural pain. I was responding from a place of groundedness and authenticity. We're looking at ourselves first. Who am I in relation to the other?
What a beautifully describing it. Can you say more about that? I just want to quickly thank you for beginning to watch this podcast episode. If you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to do so. Would love it if you join our community. You'll also be up to date on the latest content, and this really helps me reach out to more guests. You can also visit our website, centerformindfulness.ca. There's free events about mindfulness and laughter. Hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode. I am so excited and honored to be sharing a conversation with Trymaine Gaither. If you're interested in creating change in this world, supporting your qualities of being a good human, a good citizen, and using mindfulness for creating grassroot change, social justice, equity, and healing, this episode might be for you. First, a warm welcome to you, Trymaine.
Thank you. It's truly an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'll just share a little bit your bio, and I'll put that in the show note. Trymaine Gaither is a special assistant to the Provost for Inclusive Excellence at Washington State University. And for those of you who are not as aware of what Provost means, it's basically a high up, a senior academic administrator. Trymaine is also the founder of Heart-Centered Consulting, training leaders and organizations in mindfulness-based equity and belonging strategies, contemplative pedagogy, education, and self-compassion leadership with a focus on cultivating equitable and inclusive environments. Trymaine has facilitated mindfulness retreats and leadership trainings and is a mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindful self-compassion teacher. He's also a member of the Pullman City Council in Washington State, where he integrates mindfulness and anti-racism principles into his policymaking and community engagement efforts. Thank you so much again for joining us today. There's so much to cover, but I wonder if we can start with what led you to a mindfulness journey yourself, personally being interested in it, and then we can explore how it's kind of continued in your professional life. So what led you to mindfulness?
Thank you. Thank you, Kasim. And again, I can't say enough how honored I am to be with you today. So I've dedicated a significant part of my life to in the early years to church. I was a leader in a Black church in Charlotte, North Carolina for a number of years, a youth pastor. And I was very young at the time, in my early 20s, and I discovered early on that we just did not have a theology for justice. And from there, I sort of started to kind of veer out of the church and explore other religious practices. And I found my way to Howard Thurman, the author of Jesus and the Disinherited. He took a trip in the early 1930s to India, and he met Gandhi. And this was a Black man in the 30s, and he returned and wrote a book, a religious book, Jesus and the Disinherited, condemning segregation. This same book, Dr. Martin Luther King kept on him at all times in his early years. And then Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife, Coretta, they took a trip to India as well.
Mm.
And when you read different books such as Caste and you learn about Dr. Martin Luther King's theology, you realize that those practices from India and Eastern philosophy, the soul force of Gandhi, it
Mm.
was it was baked in his nonviolent theology. And that's where I kind of had that aha moment. And I
Oh.
said, okay, this might be something for me. I may have found my theology of justice. And I started exploring it more. I learned about that friendship that Dr. Martin Luther King had with Thich Nhat Hanh,
Mm.
how
Yes.
he nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for um, the Nobel Peace Prize, but they wouldn't give it to him.
Mm.
Thich Nhat Hanh, the monk, and just connecting Thich Nhat Hanh and his activism, the war in Vietnam, and Dr. Martin Luther King. I started practicing mindfulness, and I found mindfulness to be that sanctuary, a place where I
Mm.
can learn to be my authentic self to help
Mm.
others do the same. Mindfulness has had a profound impact on my knowledge around justice, equity, and especially personal authenticity. As someone who's had to navigate the complexities of identity, cultural expectations, and systemic oppression in this country,
Mm.
racism, anti-Black racism, I
Mm.
found mindfulness to be that sanctuary where I can not only ground myself and learn to truly be myself, but to also help others do the same.
Mm. What a beautiful journey. What started this journey that clearly has gone to depths for you, but really from a place of wanting to create change, but from a non-violent way, creating change in a peaceful, loving way. And it's so easy for all of us to go to the anger way, to the upset way, to the kind of revenge way. And this happens everywhere around the world. And
Mhm.
so what was it? I'm curious that is it the teaching as well of Martin Luther King? They're like, wait a minute, there's something you chose a path for creating change in your life. Was that the big influence? Like it's
Absolutely. Dr. Martin Luther King, I think he's an inspiration for so many of us, as well
mm,
as Malcolm X and others. Dr. Martin Luther King chose not to focus on Black rage. He chose to focus on love instead. And he learned that directly from the soul force that Gandhi spoke about. And I think Dr. Martin Luther King called it this love force and this hope of creating this beloved community. I
mm,
think that for me, it's easy to worry. That's my default state, to
mm,
worry. But you know, my ancestors, such spiritual ancestors, such as Dr. Martin Luther King, has kind of taught me how to flip worry and turn my worry statements into hope statements instead of asking myself, what am I worried about? Asking myself, what am I hoping for? And of
mm,
course, the ultimate hope is for that beloved community to
mm,
come to fruition that Dr. Martin Luther King hoped for. And that would only come through what he described as cosmic love, love that transcends the universe. And that's that love that goes beyond just love for our fellow man, but love for all species, love for our environment, environmental love.
what a beautiful description from these deep teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I love this. Um, this feels like very tangible love. This is not just like, um, this is actually love in action, it feels to me. This deep love in action of creating change. And I'm wondering, so from there, something pulled you to mindfulness. And what was that like as you began that journey? Because most people feel like, I don't have time to start a mindfulness practice and let alone let it influence my professional life. But I'm too busy and I got bigger problems to deal with. Why go sit and try to meditate? Like,
Mm.
what got you to start when it feels like, what is that going to do? Many
Oh
people.
man, yeah, so many thoughts come to mind, Kasim, but I'll say this. We're all in a time bind. I don't know very many people who have time, who have a lot of time, right? I think meditation and mindfulness is an enormous time saver. And I say that because I would even argue that the less time you have, the more vital mindfulness is.
Mm,
Okay. For me, I'm a part of the grind culture where I'm told to grind, push through, suffer in silence. Like most men are told, especially Black men, we're here to just grit it out, suffer in silence, make it happen, and not sit and rest and realize, okay, how am I doing? Am I
Mm,
overwhelmed? Am I overworked? Am I stressed out? How is my body doing? And why is that? So I think that if someone can find time to meditate every day for just 5 minutes,
mm,
it can have a great benefit. And mindfulness is not just to teach us to become better at meditating, it's to, learn to savor life.
mm,
So that 5 minutes, if I can turn that into every time I walk into a door or enter a meeting, I can ask myself, how am I doing? What
mm,
am I experiencing right now? Can I name that? Can I note that? And then maybe go even deeper. What do I need right now?
mm.
What do I need to feel safe in this new space? What do I need to feel to be successful? Right. And then if they really have time, they can ask this third question. And I call this a threshold practice. You can
Mm,
apply this to every door you walk through. What do I need? What am I experiencing? How do I choose to show up?
mm,
Meaning not just like I choose to show up as Will Smith or I choose to show up as some person, a value. I choose to show up,
oh,
I want to lead with the value of trust, of justice, of love, of compassion in this space. That might not be what's needed in that particular space. It might need to be, I need to be a great teammate, or just show up as kind or a deep listener or assertive. There's so many things, but just asking ourselves and checking in, those are short moments of mindfulness that we can apply
mm.
really when we walk through any space.
What a beautiful practice for listeners to contemplate. Like, this is so practical
Yeah.
and intentional. You're describing it intentional. And as you're sharing it, it made me think of, like, we have habitual ways of being, right? Like rushed, stressed, busy. I mean, we all do. And the sitting, the meditation, the mindfulness helps us break some of these habit patterns by tuning in internally what's going on, but also externally, because it's not about zoning out
Yeah.
and disconnecting from the world, is actually being engaged. And that's, for me, this is what you really are about. You're so engaged in life and community, and from such a heart-centered place. You're not somewhere on an island just meditating. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Mindfulness can help us to understand the reality of situations from the very start, right? Giving us that level of insight to allow us to appreciate situations for what they actually are. And it might not be an exciting experience. It could be the mundane. It can be just washing dishes
mm,
or walking our dogs. But those mundane experiences, that little spirit experiences is really what life is all about, right? And how
mm,
can we fully experience it and not just be in that default setting or
mm,
autopilot, just going through the motions. And then you factor in the time bond that you just mentioned, the work, the schedules for our families, the stress of trying to fit in a vacation, the vacation that you need when you return from vacation, right?
yes.
Meditation is that opportunity to teach us how to sit in silence, how to be with just what is, um, and to even create sort of an automation in that. Like, if it can just become that daily 5 minute practice or that
Mm,
daily 10-minute practice, now it becomes a part of our routine to know, okay, it's important to sit. It's important to
mm,
be with what is, with curiosity, and to take inventory, to do a check in. How am I doing? What am I
mm,
experiencing? From not just the head up, but from the neck down. What am I
mm,
experiencing? Right. And a lot of my trainings, I usually start the first session with the question, how many of you have felt back pain in the past 2 weeks? And
mm,
almost 90% of the class raises their hand. Now, what is that? What is that a sign of? It can be a sign of bad posture. It can be a sign of,
mhm.
the way you sleep, but it can also be a sign of your body holding tension.
Yeah.
It can be a sign of your body holding tightness, right? And that in and of itself is a warning sign that, hey, how much stress are you carrying? And are you even aware of it? That, I think that's the important part, just becoming more aware of where we are. Because some of us the gas light is on. We're low on fuel. We're approaching burnout and we don't even realize it, right?
So it's tuning into ourselves and
Yes,
before it's too late. Tuning
absolutely.
to, yeah. And I can so relate to that myself in my kind of crash, 20
Mhm,
something years ago of a breakdown that I had and going off work. And I wasn't really listening to those signals. So it's interesting you say that because
mhm,
it's one of the things that moved me to pursue this path is things weren't going well. I was stressed
mhm.
out of my mind and not a magic cure. Mindfulness isn't a magic cure
No,
and
okay.
at all, but it's really waking up to our lives, how it
Mhm,
is. You're naming how we are of ourselves, how our body is. And then actually, I would love to also explore how this expanded for you as looking at like bigger stressors. Like we all have our individual stress, but systemic stressors like racial stress and there's so many things. So I wonder, how did it for you begin spilling into like, wait a minute, this is not just for you that's benefiting you, but there's something very alive to bring into your work.
okay. On the
Mm.
personal level,
Yes.
right? I've, especially as I moved up professionally, right? Spaces became wider, right? And I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Black.
Mm.
And then, finished college, land a good job. Now I live in a suburban area. Then I move up even more. Now, most of my spaces are predominantly white.
Mm.
And to be honest, I'm just going to be honest. As I climbed that proverbial ladder, I
Mm.
felt the constant pressure to conform, right?
Mm.
To wear a mask to fit the expectations of others. I had to navigate spaces where I had tried to sideline my own identity and values. And that dissonance was stressful and isolating, um,
Mm.
creating a sense of being almost perpetually on edge, right? Right?
Mm.
Being hyper vigilant, even reacting to situations rather than just engaging with them authentically. And it was during those particularly challenging periods that I really started to lean on mindfulness. Right.
Mm.
Initially, I was skeptical. How could simply being present and sitting for a few minutes a day and offering self-compassion to oneself foster a deep change?
Mm.
But as I delved deeper, practicing mindfulness and self-compassion, I began to notice a shift. I was no longer reacting from a place of stress or cultural pain. I was
Mm.
responding from a place of groundedness and
Mm.
authenticity. And it was that light switch, that aha moment that's where I realized, okay, there's
Mm.
something to mindfulness.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that's quite a shift in terms of the stressors are still there, but the responding to it is where we have the power. And you really tapped into that, the power of responding to the stressors, of the external pressures you had, of conforming, being a certain way, all the different pressures you had. And it's like, wait, how can I respond differently? So, what did that lead you to? This responding differently, like it launched you to another trajectory in your work.
Again, talking just from my own personal, journey,
Mm.
I haven't kind of took it out to this societal level yet and
Hmm.
what I'm doing in the community. It helped me to understand the discomfort of that duality that W.E.B. Du Bois describes as double consciousness,
Mm.
right? Like these spaces where, I may walk into a space and I feel like I'm too Black in this space. So how do I bring that down? How do I bring my
Mm.
Blackness down and more digestible? And now that I'm reached a level professionally, I can go into spaces and I don't feel quite Black enough, right? Culturally, you know, and
Mm.
how do so there's this double consciousness that I'm navigating. I realized they're not permanent states of being, but feelings that come and go. So that realization was very liberating for me. Imagine I'm going into a space with leaders, community members, vice presidents, chancellors, whoever. I'm the only Black man in the room, worried about what I'm going to say and if I'm going to say it right. Am I going to use the wrong auxiliary verb or something,
Mhm.
or I might end up sounding like I'm spitting slang at somebody, my body language might change because I'm a little nervous. Like I'm mimicking it right now
Yeah.
and thinking to myself, wow, I feel very Black right now. You know, going from that anxiousness to
Mm.
sitting in the season where my life now where I can sit with that and explore with curiosity. Like,
Mm.
wow, in this space, I feel this identity more than in another space or in the space I was in earlier. Let me explore that with curiosity. And I can engage in those feelings now without judgment, allowing me to engage in my many identities with more spaciousness and understanding and self-acceptance. And that, I hope I'm describing this the
Mm.
way I feel it, but that was liberation for me.
Mm.
That's liberating because now there's not wearing the mask, I'm looking at the mask.
Mm. Yeah. I can see how this is liberating because the other way is kind of suppressing it, pushing it down.
Mhm.
Whatever's happening
Ignoring
is
it.
like, yeah, it's like, no, I just got it's like, push it down. But you actually tuned into it. Like there's an honoring of, wow, in this space, I'm not feeling myself. In this space, I am feeling myself. This, I'm needing to be more of it. Like you're honoring what's coming up for you moment to moment. And there's this, um, yeah, this kindness to, you're not doing anything wrong. It's something that's arising in you. I guess less judgment on that feeling.
Yes, it's less
Mm.
judgment. There's less of a sense of inferiority. I don't, I'm not afraid of the stereotype threat or, or I can hear the inner imposter in the back of my mind and I can just hear that voice and even explore that with curiosity. So it has allowed me to walk into spaces with more authenticity and understanding because I'm more grounded. And you understand that is one of the benefits of practicing mindfulness because it's sort of like it's what comes with it. With practice over time, you'll begin to experience this sense of groundedness wherever you are.
Yeah.
And it's allowed me to create spaces that encourages authenticity and understandings where others can also learn to feel safe to be themselves without masks.
This is the serving others is when we do the work ourselves, we can create spaces for others. And that becomes this positive rippling effect. This love you spoke about earlier. Like that is rippling of love, kindness in our communities. When we do the work, we actually create space for others to do that. You
Yes.
know?
And I do this not just in spaces that are like minoritized spaces, but I do this in predominantly white spaces as well. Because with mindfulness and self-compassion, it's about fostering environments where vulnerability and authenticity are not just accepted, but valued, right? And psychological safety is the highest value, right? I think Google did some research back in 2012. I
Mm.
think it was called Project Aristotle, and they kind of studied their highest performing teams and found what was the key ingredient to those highest performing teams.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't innovation. It wasn't what we would typically think. It was psychological safety. People could come to work, feel seen and heard.
Mm.
They could be vulnerable whenever they make a mistake or when they have questions. They didn't fear retribution. And because of that, they were more engaged, they were more creative and resilient. So
Mm.
I think as an educator and as a teacher, mindfulness informs my approach to not only teaching, but facilitating these trainings and retreats around equity and belonging. It's about being present first, engaged storytelling, truly listening to experiences and perspectives, that perspective taking, but not in the state of, okay, I want to learn the other. not there. We're looking at ourselves first. We're going inside first. Who am I in relation to the other? So mindfulness is great for improving and increasing our self-awareness. So starting in a place of self-awareness, emotional self-awareness, and we move out towards social awareness.
This is a really a deep point you made. I wonder if you can say more. Like, who am I in relation to others?
Mhm.
What a beautiful way of describing it. Can you say more about that? This um, looking within and looking outside, how that has supported you, because that really so well said.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you saying that. So the best way I can put it is Western education
Mm,
focuses a lot on the doing. People want to learn what to do, skills, trade, just tell folks what to do. What do I need to do to
mm,
be successful? What do I need to do to land this job? What do I need to do to achieve X, Y, and Z? That's traditional Western education.
mhm,
I'm more a student of transformed education. So
mm,
it's not what do I do, it's who must I become? Who must I become to achieve set goals? So in order to ask those questions, we must look within. We must first start with like, what is my emotional intelligence level? Like, do I even
mm,
think about it? Do I even think about emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, self-management, emotional regulation?
mm,
Um, and then, of course, obviously, moving out to social awareness and relationship building. And so it starts with me. Who am I? Who am I in relation to the other? And then
mm,
who are we in relation to one another? I'm
mm,
reminded of the Swahili
mm.
phrases of Ubuntu, because we are, I am. The Swahili salutation, Sawubona.
There is an othering that often happens. There's a me and there, and there's often, we have certain image and perspective of other races, other cultures, different gender. Oh, they're these people. And there's something here, and while there's differences, but there's also there's something that's happening in the togetherness as you're describing it. Like there's um, connecting, relating to others while they're different, but there's also something. And I think that sometimes people get confused by that. They're like, how are we the same? We're different. Yeah, but yes, we're different. And there's a common human experience here that we can tap into. The struggles are different, but there's still a similar human experience. So is this part of the getting to know ourselves in relation to our, is that how you mean it in your own journey?
Yes, it's about getting to know ourselves in relation to others. It's about connecting and tapping into our common humanity. I would like to say that I think that my training in mindful self-compassion has been very helpful in helping to come out of othering and instead
Mm,
centering our common humanity. So
mm,
the three foundational pillars of mindful self-compassion are:
mm,
one, mindfulness; two, common humanity; and then three, self-kindness. And the
mm,
reason common humanity is important because it focuses more on what connects us, what we have in common,
mm,
versus comparison. So self-esteem, for example, that's sort of like a global evaluation of self-worth based
mhm.
on comparison with others, being above
Yes.
average, being special. Self-compassion does not entail the evaluations of good and bad. It
Mm,
simply involves relating to others and relating to ourselves kindly. And it also means that where self-esteem sort of deserts us, especially if we fail,
mm,
self-compassion is there to pick us up. It's there to catch us.
mhm,
And I want to say that the reason I like to bring out common humanity is because when we look at the four pillars of
mm,
emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, the social
mm,
awareness piece, it starts with perceiving and understanding the emotions and needs of others. So that's the
mm,
empathy and compassion piece. And compassion is the quality of noticing and recognizing the suffering of others and a subsequent desire to help. Think that as we
mm,
start with ourselves and recognize how, one, we can be very hard on ourselves. There's this inner critic, this inner voice in us. This
Mm.
can be very harsh unless we practice self-kindness,
Yeah.
or we have something that's teaching us about um, kind of changing the voice or the way we speak to ourselves. As we learn that and learn, even in that one thing, that is one thing that's almost universal. Most of us have a harsh inner critic
Mm.
that is the opposite of self-compassion.
Yeah.
So
But not
as we
good, but not good enough. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so whenever we start to explore self-compassion together, and our compassion towards ourselves expand, it naturally helps us to be more compassionate to others. Because we'll start to
Mm.
see so many other areas where folks are suffering in our midst that we didn't even recognize, we didn't even see. And
Mm.
I like what Rhonda V. McGee says in her book, The Inner Works of Racial Justice. It's just racial justice is the attempt to alleviate all forms of racism,
Mm.
especially the racism that's hard to see because it's nothing more than suffering. It's just additional suffering. So it's the othering, it can happen, but with looking within first, it's not the other we're looking at ourselves and saying, okay, how can
Mm.
I grow my bowels of compassion? How can I grow my empathy? How can I lead by my values?
Mm.
And from there, a natural desire to alleviate suffering and to alleviate systems of advantage based on race and alleviate systems of oppression and kind of grow from that soil.
Mm.
And it requires emotional and social awareness. We must learn to perceive and understand emotions and the needs of others, starting with ourselves. And I think
Mm.
we're skipping base if we try to understand the emotions of others and we don't know our own emotional rate, our own emotional state, and how to perceive our own emotions. And if we don't know how to be compassionate to ourselves, how can we really give this person empathy? Now, mind you, it is easier to say some kind words to a friend when they failed or felt inadequate than it is for ourselves. But what happens when we start to learn how to treat ourselves with the same kindness as we would a dear friend
Mm.
in moments, especially when we feel inadequate or we failed at something? So I think that it's important, and especially when you're doing equity work, to include
Mm.
mindfulness and self-compassion as the foundation for everything else that you teach in your
Mm.
trainings.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing this because I'm getting how part of the social and racial justice work is an equity is getting to know ourselves. So it's not just about, oh, I have to just understand these other people out there. It's how am I inside? So I can relate to others. I extend compassion, empathy to myself so I can extend it to others. So it becomes a bridge. Mindfulness becomes a bridge for creating healing. And that's what I'm getting as you're describing this social justice and equity work. Can you say a little more about your work with that?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think cultivating mindful awareness and present moment experience is key,
Mm.
because without mindfulness, we may not even notice our own suffering, let alone the
Mm.
suffering in our midst. So I lead a few different programs at Washington State University. I've created a program called the Mindfulness Based Anti-Racism program. It is it's more of a learning community where
Mm.
over at this point, over 200 or so faculty have gone through the program, and they form learning communities after I teach a
Mm.
three-part series, all 2.5 hours long. So it's pretty intensive and it's quite the commitment. But that's one program that I've offered
Mm.
for Washington State University. As you mentioned, I also serve on the city council for my local city and here in
Mm.
Pullman, where
Mhm.
I'm working to incorporate these strategies in my community engagement efforts.
And you also did some work in Flint, I think. Is that right? And was that part of the
Yes.
work with? Yeah. Can you say that was just really Fascinating work. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a part of a group of researchers who have, for the past 2 years, piloted a community-based research project where we bring Black community leaders together with the law enforcement of the city of Flint. I've designed and I lead the a 6-week mindfulness program for the Black community leaders. A retired law enforcement officer and mindfulness teacher leads a 6-week mindfulness program for the law enforcement. Then we bring them together for an all-day retreat. And we've seen a lot of increase in the past 2 years of engagement. We've seen a reduction in unconscious bias with police, and the stories that are shared, the walls that are broken down in those retreats are just amazing. They're life changing. They've really changed me for the better. And we have a grant now to continue this work for 3 more years.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
I wish I could just
appear middle of those and just see what's happening and be part of it, because what you're describing is here's some tension. Talk about tension and stress and bringing people together as humans, and that both sides are suffering, whatever side we're on, whatever side, whether it's race, whatever ethnicity, whatever it is. Sometimes we forget they're like me. There's something that they're struggling with too. And we somehow dehumanize the other. And the work you've been doing and the work that you're doing here in Flint as well, this is kind of creating common humanity.
Yeah. And you would think that wouldn't happen given the power dynamics in the room, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that the Black community leaders would be able to see behind the blue veil and see humans behind those uniforms and behind the badge. But it happens. Yeah, in 2023, an officer from the Flint Police Department was charged with using excessive force. And he was charged by his own department. And that's a type of cultural shift that we want to see in law enforcement in general. We want them to hold one another accountable. And I think part of that is what we're hoping to do. We hope that whenever the retreat and the training is complete, the law enforcement see a deeper common humanity and deeper interconnectedness with the communities they serve. And the residents see them as, okay, these are public servants. I'm paying my tax dollars for them. They're here to serve me, not surveil me, not harm me, not kill me. And it takes some humanity and seeing behind that blue uniform and the badge. So there are humans behind there that can potentially change for the better, if nowhere else in your community, as they're serving your community. I have one anecdotal story. A law enforcement officer, he had a horrible day that morning, and he was sitting in his car. I think, it was an early shift, and I don't know, I don't know the details of why his day started off wrong, but he was in a bad mood. And he was sitting in his police car on a busy intersection, and a man crossed the street, a Black man crossed the street. And as the Black man crossed the street, he gave this officer the middle finger. And the officer immediately said, his habitual reactionary pattern, he thought to himself, I can easily get out of the car and say, hey man, it looks like you're jaywalking, ask to pat him down and give him a very hard time. Just get on his nerves the way he's getting on my nerves. And he said, but I didn't. And to me, that's just a success. Little things like that. And it may seem small, but he said, I noticed that I was being reactionary. I noticed that it was a reaction. I was triggered. I stopped. I took a breath. I observed what I was feeling. I observed my sensations. I observed the storyline connected to it. And then I proceeded, but I proceeded with more, in his words, I proceeded with more presence. He made a wiser decision. And that's really some of the small tangible benefits of mindfulness and that practice. we're just not going to be swept away in our routine, habitual reactionary patterns. We can stop and have more agency in how we choose to respond. And those are small examples, but to me, those are the wins, because that is the feeling in many Black communities, feeling over surveilled, feeling like they have too many encounters with law enforcement, too many run-ins with police, whereas police should be serving the community, not just surveilling them,
Right.
and causing the community more stress. So those are the type of things we're thinking about. And we're using mindfulness as a tool to reduce unconscious bias and to reduce those, and hopefully in the long run, reduce interactions like that.
And all it takes is a moment.
Yes.
It's a moment, and a moment of habitual reactivity. And this really wonderful example you gave is the officer became aware, and there's nothing wrong with having some awareness, like, whoa, I'm wanting to do this. No, it's not a good idea. It's having that bit of a space when there's a pause, even a few seconds of recognizing, what am I being pulled to do here? And not doing it. Like that takes courage on both sides. It takes courage to go, I really want to do this, may not be helpful. Let's not. What a moment. It's like a pausing to really elevating, making things better in the moment.
And with mindfulness kind of strengthens that muscle to create that gap between a trigger or a stressor and a reaction. And so that it now goes from a stressor or a trigger and a reaction to a trigger and a response, because with mindfulness, we can become aware of what's arising in us and allow us time to, one, accept what we're feeling, right? Discern the situation with a little bit more clarity, examine our patterns and how we traditionally react, and then determine with more intentionality how we want to respond. That response flexibility, the ability to pause just for a second, right? And that gives us that choice in how we want to react in emotional situations. And I would also say that back to the humanity part, the human part, I think it was important when one of the officers shared some facts that we don't usually hear when it comes to the profession of law enforcement. Law enforcement officers have a very hard job.
Yeah.
Just talking to their shift, they either work 12 hours first shift, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. They have the graveyard shift, is what they call it, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Or they have the split shift, right? And the split shift is like 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. And you rotate every quarter. So every officer has to work one of those shifts every year, if not twice. And so how do you create a healthy eating pattern? How do you, your digestive system has to change every 3 months. And on top of that, you deal with people on their worst days. Like, no one wants to be pulled over in a traffic stop. No one wants an officer coming to their home. So they're dealing with all of these things. And on top of that, they have the highest divorce rates. It's one of the few jobs where they can lose their life. And so there is this humanity that we can learn from listening to just, they are stressed, right? How can we work to help them deal with that stress so they're not hyper aroused? They're not hyper vigilant when they're dealing with folks. And also, of course, the deeper questions goes into training. How can we go less warrior training and more, like servant style, servant-based training? I don't know the correct term for it. And I think that's also important for community members to hear. But most importantly, community members need to understand that most of their taxes is going to law enforcement. See it as that too. You are paying taxes for that service. It's also a service. Demand better from your cities. Demand better. That's a service that you're paying for.
It kind of loops back to this whole idea of this mindfulness path, mindfulness journey is not about just inaction and being, sitting on a chair or cushion and just disconnecting. Is about creating change, taking positive action when action is needed. And you've shared so many of those. And I have so many more questions for you, even though I know we're just at the end, but I have something that just I'm wondering about you that you described, this humanity, this vision of compassion and caring and connection. If you imagine we fast forward 200 years from now, 200 years, and the work that you're doing continues rippling and rippling, what is your best hope if we have this, we can just appear 200 years from now and this
Mm.
work in mindfulness and compassion and equity and social justice? What are you envisioning that you're hoping for?
I'm hoping for the same thing that Dr. King hopes for,
Mm,
that beloved community.
mm,
I think that in a lot of ways, I like to consider myself a recovering Christian because
mm,
my hope is set in a hope I think that is a godly hope. Um,
mm,
I'm reminded of a scripture. I think it's Psalms 45:6, to think of God or this universe's sphere of influence
mm,
is a kingdom defined by justice. Think that um, ignoring justice would be like ignoring love, ignoring
mm,
truth. We create a caricature of our religion. We create a caricature of character. Many of us say that, okay, we want to live according to values such as love, truth, self-compassion. I want to argue that justice is a hallmark value. Justice is distinctive, and it's a feature of God's character. And for any secular-based listeners out there, let it be a signature feature of our character and
mm,
our hope for the world. And so
mm.
200 years from now, hopefully it's a world ruled by justice.
Kind, compassionate, and clear justice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think that mindfulness, self-compassion, first starting with ourselves because we're so hard on ourselves.
Mm,
And we all work so hard. We're under such a time bind and we're in such a grind culture.
mm.
And in a lot of ways, many of us are just so oppressed and pushed down. I think it starts with ourselves, and that love we give ourselves, that compassion we give ourselves as our cups are overflowing will
Mm,
fill the hearts of others.
mm.
And we'll begin to heal as a community as we take care of ourselves and the suffering and our midst the less fortunate.
How beautifully said. As you're describing that, I'm just imagining like if all of us on this planet fill our cup of kindness, compassion, love, of intention, creating healing, possibilities are quite endless. So,
It is.
yeah, thank you for a beautiful share, beautiful work. And I'm wondering, how can people reach you? And I can put it in the show notes. Is it through a certain link you want me to put, or?
Yeah, I'll share my link. I have a LinkedIn account and all that jazz, but yeah, please share it.
Sure. I'll put
Yeah.
that LinkedIn link in the show notes. And any final thing you want the listeners to know, any final thoughts as we come to a close?
I just can't thank you enough for having me. And may everyone that listen or watch this video, listen to this podcast, may you give yourself what you need to be healthy in heart, mind, and body. May you have the courage and motivation to change things if necessary. And may you accept yourself just as you are. Thank you.
Words of from the heart of wisdom. Thank you for your beautiful heart, your beautiful work. And I want to thank all the listeners for listening. And if you're watching on YouTube, for watching. If you found this useful and helpful, feel free to share, like, and subscribe. You can also visit the website, centerformindfulness.ca, for free information sessions about mindfulness. Thank you again. May your moments be filled with ease, and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you.